So David made the fortress his home, and he called it the City of David. He extended the city, starting at the supporting terraces and working inward. And David became more and more powerful, because the Lord, God of heaven's armies, was with him. So basically, a lot of this just comes down to David takes over that fortress and makes it his home. And then because he's made it his home and he's king, then there's a palace that's built. And there's development of that area. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alright. So we're looking at 2 Samuel chapter 5. Now, the past few chapters of 2 Samuel have basically seen enemies of David, in a way, either slain or otherwise end up dying. And while you would think that's to David's advantage, and it kind of is, the way it all transpires, he has not necessarily been the biggest fan of, because it's usually people, you know, whether close to him or not, trying to take advantage of a situation and pretty much just outright killing other people when there's little other reason to do so. But anyway, what that has resulted in, though, is that David, at least for the moment, is the only presiding king over any portion of Israel. He was just king of Judah, and then there was a guy named Ishbosheth, who was one of the sons of the previous king, Saul. Ishbosheth was kind of king over most, if not all, the rest of Israel. Pretty much just because there was a disagreement, at least in some people's eyes, over who should really be king. But Ishbosheth is now dead. And that's kind of where we pick things up in 2 Samuel chapter 5 here. So, without further ado, let's hop into the Bible study here. Then all the tribes of Israel went to David at Hebron and told him, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, when Saul was our king, you were the one who really led the forces of Israel. And the Lord told you, 'You will be the shepherd of my people Israel. You will be Israel's leader.' So there at Hebron, King David made a covenant before the Lord with all the elders of Israel, and they anointed him king of Israel." So, people basically saying that even when Saul was king, David was really like the primary leader, especially when it came to like military conquests and things of that sort. They had even praised his, military might and ability and his victories more than Saul's. It was even stated at one point in 1 Samuel. I forget which chapter exactly, but so now that Saul and his son Ishbosheth and basically any claim his family had to the throne is gone, now people are more fully willing to say, all right, look, this was kind of inevitable. Let's just make you the king, full stop. Note there in the past says, "for some time," is another way that could be translated, essentially. But still, for some time when Saul was our king, it's not exactly a significant difference in meaning for that sentence there. So let's see here, verse 4. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years in all. He had reigned over Judah from Hebron for 7 years and 6 months, And from Jerusalem he reigned over all Israel and Judah for 33 years. Okay, so that still leaves me a little bit confused, because previously I think it mentioned Ishbosheth only being king for, like, 2 years? But then it sounds like David was king over Judah for longer than Ishbosheth was king. Just period. I guess there could have been like a 5-year-ish gap in between Ishbosheth's death and David reigning from Jerusalem, because it mentions specifically from Jerusalem in here as the part that was 33 years. So, minor detail, but it could, paint a more accurate picture. The timing, the exact timing isn't quite clearly stated. But, in any case, David is now king over all of it, rather than just Judah. Alright, then we get to verse 6. David then led his men to Jerusalem to fight against the Jebusites, the original inhabitants of the land who were living there. The Jebusites taunted David, saying, "You'll never get in here. Even the blind and lame could keep you out." For the Jebusites thought they were safe. But David captured the fortress of Zion, which is now called the City of David. So yeah, Jerusalem wasn't even like an early Israelite conquest per se. Back when Joshua would have initially led the people into Israel and started taking over some of the land. Wasn't even all the way through the Judges or during Saul's reign. All that time passed between when, between when God's people left Egypt, entered the Promised Land, and then, actually had Jerusalem conquered. But we'll find out eventually, as most people tend to think of when thinking of Israel, that Jerusalem ends up basically being the capital. But anyway, so yeah, David's leading a fight against the Jebusites to take over this particular area. Also, you'll hear Zion referenced quite a bit throughout the Bible in all likelihood. Mentioned, that it's now called the City of David. That can be kind of symbolic sometimes also literal. But it's, that's the correlation there, essentially, is always with David, to some effect. Because he was the one that captured this fortress of Zion and laid claim to that initially for Israel. But anyway, on to verse 8. On the day of the attack, David said to his troops, "I hate those lame and blind Jebusites. Whoever attacks them should strike by going into the city through the water tunnel." That is the origin of the saying, "The blind and the lame may not enter the house." Okay. Meaning of this saying is uncertain. It's okay, but apparently it was some fairly common saying / figure of speech sort of thing back in those times. Or at least a little bit after those times, maybe. And, of course, David turning the mockery of the Jebusites sort of back on them in a way. Or at least giving him motivation to, you know, end up, or further motivation, really, to end up conquering them. Could also read as, those lame and blind Jebusites hate me. Okay. But you would think there's a mutual dislike of some sort, at least. Then again, David being a rather gracious man, maybe it wasn't as hateful back in that way. I don't know. The whole thing about trying to flip the mockery on its head still stands. Note there about going through the water tunnel. It says, or with scaling hooks, meaning of the Hebrews uncertain. Okay. That's a totally different method, though. I mean, unless we're talking like aqueduct kind of situations. But otherwise, one would imply taking a low road, meaning the water tunnel, whereas, you know, going in with scaling hooks would imply scaling an outer wall, as would happen quite often with fortresses. But, anyway, semantic kind of things that aren't real crucial to the big picture. It's just, you know, the notes are included there just to make people aware of other potential wordings. But really, the overall gist here still kind of stays the same. Alright. Moving on to verse 9. So David made the fortress his home, and he called it the City of David. He extended the city, starting at the supporting terraces and working inward. And David became more and more powerful, because the Lord, God of heaven's armies, was with him. Then King Hiram of Tyre sent messengers to David, along with cedar, timber, and carpenters and stonemasons, and they built David a palace. And David realized that the Lord had confirmed him as king over Israel, and had blessed his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. Not for David's sake, though, for the sake of the people Israel, God's chosen people. David was not one to be full of himself and think that it was for him specifically. So basically, a lot of this just comes down to David takes over that fortress and makes it his home. And then because he's made it his home and he's king, then there's a palace that's built. And there's development of that area. Hebrew says the Millo instead of the supporting terraces, I guess. Meaning of the Hebrews uncertain. Okay. Palace is built. Then verse 13. After moving from Hebron to Jerusalem, David married more concubines and wives, and they had more sons and daughters. These are the names of David's sons who were born in Jerusalem: Shammua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphalet. It had previously mentioned his sons that were born to him while he was in Hebron. Now I guess it's just mentioning other sons that were born to him. Solomon should ring a bell to anybody who knows much of anything about the Bible. But yeah. Again, polygamy was a common thing back then, not saying that that's condoned, though. Or preferred by God. Okay, so now we're at verse 17. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king of Israel, they mobilized all their forces to capture him. But David was told they were coming, So he went into the stronghold. The Philistines arrived and spread out across the valley of Rephaim. So David asked the Lord, "Should I go out to fight the Philistines? Will you hand them over to me?" The Lord replied to David, "Yes, go ahead. I will certainly hand them over to you." Okay. The Philistines would have been fairly familiar with David, at least some of them would have been. David actually lived amongst the Philistines for a while after he had fled from Saul, because Saul wanted to kill him, and he just was trying to find somewhere else to live, and he figured, well, Philistines are constantly against Saul, so, like, unless there's an all-out war going on, which I would probably end up participating in anyway, this is where I would go to, basically be away from Saul pursuing me. So, perhaps with their knowledge of David and his military conquests before having to flee from Saul and other significant deeds of David's, maybe their thought was, ooh, maybe we should attack. Maybe we should try and get him out of there, remove a major leader of the people before David really has a significant chance to, like, make his kingdom strong. Or something along those lines. Maybe that's why they attacked. It's not exactly stated, but it does say that they sought to capture David. Anyway, then we get to verse 20. So David went to Baal Perazim and defeated the Philistines there. "The Lord did it," David exclaimed. "He burst through my enemies like a raging flood." So he named that place Baal Perazim, which means the Lord who bursts through. Philistines had abandoned their idols there, so David and his men confiscated them. And you would think destroyed them? So unsurprisingly, I mean, God said that, David would be victorious if he attacked the Philistines, if he fought against them. And so David follows up on that, attacks, and is victorious. Not too much else to say there. So, on to verse 22. But after a while, the Philistines returned and again spread out across the valley of Rephaim. And again David asked the Lord what to do. "Do not attack them straight on," the Lord replied. "Instead, circle around behind and attack them near the poplar trees. When you hear a sound like marching feet in the tops of the poplar trees, be on the alert. That will be the signal that the Lord is moving ahead of you to strike down the Philistine army." So David did what the Lord commanded, and he struck down the Philistines all the way from Gibeon to Gezer. So, I mean, there had been a significant amount of back and forth between Israel and the Philistines for decades, if not even longer. But, so we see, though, that David is, having victory over them multiple times. And so first it's against this one, it's at this one place, Baal Perazim, but then the Philistines kind of end up coming back near there. David asks God whether or not to fight them again. God says, okay, but don't, just go straight on, circle around them, and wait for my signal. How exactly God is going to move ahead of David and his army, it's not made clear, but when God says that's what's going to happen, it's best to trust it. Footnote there says, could have been aspen or balsam rather than poplar trees. Exact identification is uncertain. But one would assume it was well known. Or at least in some way God would have made it clear where that David should wait for the signal. Also, I guess this is kind of considered a note tied to Gibeon. That's as in the Greek version. Hebrew reads Geba. Different names for the same place, though. Although could slightly change the meaning of the name of the place, but on the whole, it's still ultimately the same. Normally, if the name of a place is, like, really, really significant to what's going on, it'll, like, pretty much spell it out afterwards that, hey, this name means this. So anyway, David finding some success against the Philistines as he is king. But, that's all we got for 2 Samuel chapter 5. Alright, so David is officially the one and only king in Israel at this point. He winds up taking over Jerusalem, making that the, like, new capital, and there's a palace being built, and there's a fight with the Philistines, bunch of stuff going on in this chapter, and a lot of good things for David, pretty much. But anyway, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell if you're on YouTube to get updates when I post new videos. If you're seeing this anywhere else, give me a follow or whatever you got to do there. Look down in the description for info on social media pages and links to find and follow those. And of course, leave comments down below that with any thoughts you have. So that'll do for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. But whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.